Imagine for a moment that everything you've been taught about the history of North America is a meticulously crafted half-truth. We are told that before the arrival of Europeans, the Great Lakes region was a pristine wilderness, inhabited only by nomadic tribes living in simple structures. But the dusty archives of the 19th century tell a far more disturbing story, one that the modern scientific establishment has spent over 100 years trying to bury. In the summer of 1897, near the quiet town of Maple Creek, Wisconsin, a group of laborers was excavating a burial mound. They expected to find pottery or stone tools. Instead, they struck something hard, something massive. As they brushed away the dirt, they didn't find a normal human skull. They found a nightmare. It was a cranium so large it could easily fit over a grown man's head like a helmet. But the most terrifying detail? The jawbone contained a double row of teeth, razor-sharp, interlocking, and designed for a bite force no modern human could possess. This wasn't an isolated incident. From the shores of Lake Michigan to the deep forests of Ontario, thousands of these anomalous skeletons were unearthed during the westward expansion of the United States. These weren't just tall men, they were giants, reaching heights of 9, 10, and even 12 feet. These findings weren't published in tabloid rags. They were reported by the New York Times, the Chicago Tribune, and even the Smithsonian's own early field agents. Yet, if you walk into any museum today, those bones are gone. There are no displays, no replicas, and certainly no mention of them in your history books. Why did thousands of physical proofs of a lost civilization simply vanish into thin air? Tonight, we aren't just looking at old newspaper clips. We are peeling back the curtain on an institutional cover-up that stretches from the deepest trenches of the Great Lakes to the highest vaults in Washington, D.C. Welcome to the Kanata Files. Today, we uncover the giants that history forgot. To understand where these giants went, we first have to look at where they lived, or rather, where they were buried. Across the American Midwest and the Great Lakes Basin, the landscape is scarred by hundreds of thousands of earthworks known as mounds. To the casual observer, they look like natural hills. But to a surveyor, they are a mathematical impossibility for a primitive culture. These mounds are shaped into perfect geometric forms: pyramids, cones, and massive effigies of serpents and panthers that can only be fully appreciated from the air. For decades, the official narrative has been that these were built by the ancestors of modern Native Americans. But there's a problem with that story. When early settlers asked the local tribes, the Iroquois, the Lenape, and the Wyandot, who built these colossal structures, the answer was almost always the same: not us. They spoke of a race of powerful, ancient people who occupied the land long before their ancestors arrived. They called them the Allegui, or the Adirondacks, a civilization that excelled in engineering and war. In the mid-1800s, as towns like Detroit and Cleveland began to expand, these mounds were leveled to make way for roads and farms. What lay inside shocked the nation. Unlike the typical burials of local tribes, these mounds contained multi-layered stone vaults. Inside these vaults, explorers found skeletons that defied the laws of biology. In 1830, near Newark, Ohio, excavators uncovered a skeleton encased in a copper armor, clutching a massive stone tablet. The man was over 8 feet tall. His bone density was significantly higher than that of a modern human, suggesting a frame built for immense physical power. By the time the late 1800s rolled around, the discovery of giants in mounds had become so common that it was treated as a scientific fact. In 1881, a report from the Bureau of Ethnology described the opening of a mound in Kanawha County, which revealed a 7'6" giant. His joints were massive, and his teeth were reported to be thick and heavy, arranged in a way that suggested a different evolutionary path. The artifacts found with them were equally baffling. We're talking about highly polished obsidian blades, copper breastplates, and intricate jewelry made from materials found thousands of miles away. This suggests a massive interconnected trade network that spanned the continent long before the Vikings or Columbus ever dreamed of crossing the Atlantic. Yet, despite the thousands of documented cases, the mound builder civilization is often glossed over in modern academia as a simple, localized phenomenon. Why? Because the deeper you dig into these mounds, the more the traditional timeline of human history begins to crumble. If a race of highly advanced, physically superior beings ruled the Great Lakes for millennia, it means we aren't the peak of civilization on this continent. We might just be the ones living on top of their ruins. If you ask a modern archaeologist about giants, they will likely dismiss the idea as a Victorian-era hoax or a misunderstanding of megafauna bones. But if you talk to the elders of the Great Lakes tribes, the perspective shifts from skepticism to a sobering historical reality. For the indigenous people of North America, these giants weren't a myth. They were a terrifying part of their ancestral survival. The oral traditions of the Ojibwe, the Iroquois, and the Lenape do not describe these beings as gods or spirits, but as flesh and blood entities that once dominated the Great Lakes basin. The Choctaw, for instance, tell legends of a race of giants known as the Naholo. These were a people of enormous stature and incredible strength who inhabited the Tennessee and Mississippi River valleys, stretching up toward the Great Lakes. According to their lore, the Naholo were not just tall, they were fierce, often described as cannibals who viewed the smaller human tribes as little more than prey. This isn't just a campfire story, it's a strategic history of warfare. Many tribes describe a great war that took place thousands of years ago, a coordinated effort by multiple human alliances to reclaim the land from these colossal overlords. One of the most chilling accounts comes from the Paiute tribe in the neighboring regions. They spoke of the Siteka, a tribe of red-haired giants. Legend has it that after generations of conflict, the Paiute finally trapped the last of these giants in a cave and set it on fire, ending their reign. For decades, historians laughed at this story, labeling it pure folklore. That is, until 1911, when guano miners in Lovelock Cave, Nevada, started digging and found exactly what the legend described. Massive, red-haired, mummified remains, some standing nearly 10 feet tall. In the Great Lakes, the Ojibwe speak of the Wendigo, often interpreted today as a spirit of greed. However, in older traditions, the Wendigo was often associated with ancient, giant-like beings who lived in the deep forests and possessed a hunger that could never be satisfied. The common thread across these diverse cultures, from the Atlantic coast to the Great Lakes, is the description of physical traits that mirror the 19th century archaeological reports: double rows of teeth, 6 fingers on each hand, and a shock of bright red or auburn hair. Why does this matter? Because in Western academia, oral tradition is often treated as secondary to hard science. Yet, these indigenous stories provide the context that the Dry Museum reports lack. They explain why the mounds were built with such defensive precision. They explain the sudden disappearance of these giants, not through a gradual decline, but through a bloody, continental-scale uprising. The Native American testimony suggests that the Great Lakes weren't just a wilderness. They were the final battleground of an ancient world order. The elders insist that these giants weren't primitive or ape-like. They were a sophisticated, albeit brutal, civilization that understood metallurgy, geometry, and large-scale governance. By ignoring these oral histories, modern science isn't just dismissing legends, it is silencing the witnesses of a lost era. We are ignoring the people who actually lived alongside these titans, who fought them, and who ultimately buried them. If we truly want to find the truth about the bones in the Great Lakes, we have to stop looking at the ground and start listening to the keepers of the stories, because they remember a version of America that we aren't allowed to know. If thousands of these skeletons were found and documented by credible sources, including the New York Times and local scientists, the logical question is, where are they now? Why can't you go to the National Museum of Natural History in Washington, D.C. and see a 10-foot skeleton with double rows of teeth? To answer that, we have to look into what researchers call the Smithsonian Black Hole. In the late 1800s, the Smithsonian Institution was designated as the federal government's primary repository for archaeological finds. During this golden age of archaeology, the institution sent out field agents across the Ohio Valley and the Great Lakes. Their job was to catalog the mounds before they were destroyed by expansion. The early annual reports of the Smithsonian, specifically those between 1880 and 1900, are filled with descriptions of gigantic remains. Major John Wesley Powell, the director at the time, oversaw many of these expeditions. Yet, as the years passed, a strange pattern emerged. The reports became more vague. The word giant was replaced with large. Eventually, the mentions ceased altogether. The physical evidence followed the same path. There are dozens of documented accounts from local sheriffs and doctors who unearthed massive bones and, acting out of a sense of duty, crated them up and shipped them via rail to the Smithsonian for study. But once those crates reached the docks in Washington, they seemed to vanish. No receipt was ever issued. No follow-up report was published. It was as if the bones had entered a vacuum. Why would a scientific institution want to hide the greatest archaeological discovery in human history? The answer lies in the fierce ideological battle taking place at the turn of the century. This was the era when Darwin's theory of evolution was being institutionalized as the only acceptable narrative of human origin. The existence of a race of giants, entities that didn't fit into the slow, linear progression of primitive ape to modern man, was a biological anomaly that threatened the entire framework. If giants existed, it meant there was a lost chapter of humanity that couldn't be explained by the current model. Furthermore, there was a political dimension. The United States was in the midst of manifest destiny. The narrative of the time was that North America was a new world, a vast, empty wilderness waiting to be tamed by civilized Europeans. Admitting that a sophisticated, technologically advanced, and physically superior civilization had ruled the continent for thousands of years before Columbus would have complicated the moral justification for westward expansion. It was easier to label the mound builders as simple ancestors of Indians, or better yet, to make the evidence disappear entirely. The controversy reached a boiling point in the 21st century with the surfacing of rumors regarding a Supreme Court case. While many dismiss it as an internet urban legend, the Smithsonian Giant lawsuit of 2014 allegedly involved the American Institution of Alternative Anthropology, AIAA, accusing the Smithsonian of destroying thousands of giant human remains to protect the orthodox chronological narrative of human evolution. Whether the lawsuit is a myth or a reality, the sentiment behind it is grounded in a century of frustration from independent researchers who have been met with access denied at every turn. We also have the testimony of whistleblowers like Dr. Alish Hrdlicka, a former curator at the Smithsonian who was notoriously hostile toward any find that suggested anomalous history. He was known to personally dismiss giant finds as distorted bones or misidentifications without ever visiting the sites. Under his tenure, the Smithsonian filter became absolute. Today, if you ask the Smithsonian about these bones, their standard response is that they have no records of such findings and that any reports from the 1800s were simply exaggerations of the press. But can we really believe that hundreds of different newspapers, independent doctors, and even their own field agents were all part of a mass hallucination? Or is it more likely that in the basement vaults of our national museums, there are crates that haven't been opened in 100 years? Crates containing the proof that our history is not what we've been told? The black hole of the Smithsonian isn't just about missing bones, it's about a missing truth. While the bones hidden in museum vaults remain out of reach, a new frontier of evidence has emerged where the Smithsonian's influence cannot easily reach: the bottom of the Great Lakes themselves. In recent years, as sonar technology and underwater drones have become more accessible to independent researchers, the deep waters of Lake Michigan and Lake Huron have begun to surrender secrets that rewrite the timeline of North America. In 2007, a professor of underwater archaeology at Northwestern Michigan College was searching for shipwrecks when his sonar picked up something impossible. Submerged 40 feet below the surface of Grand Traverse Bay was a series of massive stones arranged in a perfect circle. It looked exactly like a prehistoric Stonehenge. Even more shocking was one particular pillar, which appeared to feature a distinct carving of a mastodon, an animal that has been extinct for over 10,000 years. How does this connect to our giants? Geological data shows that 10,000 years ago, the water levels of the Great Lakes were significantly lower, exposing vast land bridges. The Stonehenge of Lake Michigan sits directly along the migration routes described in the indigenous legends of the giants. It suggests that the mound builders weren't just land dwellers, they were masters of a landscape that is now lost to the waves. Similar anomalies have been detected near Thunder Bay, Ontario. Scuba divers have reported seeing massive squared-off stone blocks at depths that should only contain natural silt. These aren't random rocks. They are megalithic structures that mirror the craftsmanship found in the burial mounds on land. This underwater evidence provides a crucial missing link. If these giants possess the engineering skill to move multi-ton stones and carve images of megafauna, they represent a civilization that existed long before the official arrival of humans in North America. It suggests that when the glaciers melted and the lakes rose, this Titan civilization was forced onto higher ground, into the very areas where we now find their burial mounds. The water hasn't just preserved these structures, it has protected them from the institutional cleaning that happened on land. You can't crate up a stone circle at the bottom of a lake and hide it in a basement. As the Great Lakes continue to reveal these submerged monuments, the narrative of a primitive North America becomes harder and harder to defend. The giants didn't just leave behind bones, they left a permanent, megalithic footprint that is finally coming back into the light. The evidence is scattered across our fields, buried beneath our lakes, and locked away in the silent vaults of our institutions. The giants of the Great Lakes aren't just a campfire story or a tabloid sensation. They are the ghost of a suppressed history that refuses to stay buried. We have to ask ourselves, if they lied about the giants, what else have they hidden about our origins? We are a generation living with historical amnesia, but the archives are still there, and the Earth is still giving up its secrets. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever encountered a strange mound in your hometown, or stumbled upon a local archive that didn't make sense? Does your family have stories of the giants passed down through generations? Drop a comment below. Your insight might be the missing piece of the puzzle. If you want to keep digging into the forbidden files of history, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. The truth is out there, hidden in plain sight. And this is the Kanata Files. Until next time, keep your eyes open.